the things that you all prayed for from your hearts tonight. It just, we don't have to be the same as everyone else. Talking about the hope that's set before us, that we can build each other up, edify one another, that we're thankful to know the truth, and that God is always reminding us of who we are in Christ. Said in the manifestations, he would fulfill our desires. Until that comes up tonight. Said that we have heard his voice.
Yeah.
That he wants us to know him, to fellowship with him more and more. And then, my habitation is now within you. Fabulous words of prayer and from our Father. Just fantastic. Well, what I'm going to share tonight, I shared about maybe 2.5 years ago, but I wasn't satisfied with it. I think Michelle heard it, maybe Rob Woods, Betsy, and Susan, and Donna Catulli. I want to share it afresh because to me, it's so powerful. Such a wonderful time in the history of Israel. The Second Temple period, the time of rebuilding the temple, is so fantastic. Romans 15:4 says, "For whatever was written previous was written to teach us," from the REV, to teach us. Such a much better translation than King James. Was written for our learning. To teach us that through perseverance, staying at it, holding up under pressure, through perseverance and through the encouragement of the scriptures, we would have hope. So when we read the Old Testament, you know what? We're supposed to learn something. We're supposed to get something out of it. That's what it's there for. So I'm going to give you some dates. Now, these dates are not set in stone, but they're really close. It's really difficult to work some of this dating. But I want you to see what's happening just before and during the children of Israel, or Judah really, coming out of captivity, out of 70 years of captivity in Babylon. Habakkuk begins to prophesy around 609 BC. The captivity in Babylon begins between 604 and 608 BC, right after Habakkuk prophesies. Daniel begins to prophesy in 605 BC, or thereabouts. These dates could swing 1 or 2 years one way or another. Then Ezekiel begins to prophesy 593 BC. Then we get to Ezra. And I want you to go to Ezra chapter 1. Ezra is a scribe, and he lives in Babylon. He was carried away in the captivity to Babylon, along with a lot of other of Judah and Benjamin. But Ezra chapter 1, the beginning of chapter 1, takes place in 538 BC, near the end of the 70 years of captivity. So there's a lot of spiritual capital that God is putting to work at this point in time in history. He's got Habakkuk prophesying just before or right at the beginning of the captivity, then the captivity taking place, Daniel right away, Ezekiel a little later, not very long, 7, 8, 9, 10, 12 years later, and now Ezra at the end of the captivity, starting to write and record. Now, in the first year of Cyrus, king of Persia, that the word of Yahweh by the mouth of Jeremiah might be accomplished. And 100 years before, thereabouts, somewhere in that neighborhood, you had Isaiah and Jeremiah prophesying, and Obadiah. There's a lot of stuff going on in a very short amount of time. That the word of Yahweh by the mouth of Jeremiah might be accomplished. Yahweh stirred up the spirit of Cyrus, king of Persia, so that he made a proclamation throughout all his kingdom, and also putting it in writing, saying, and that's very important that he put it in writing, and Ezra documents that. This is what King Cyrus of Persia says: Yahweh, the God of heaven, has given me all the kingdoms of the earth, and he has commanded me to build him a house in Jerusalem, which is in Judea. Whoever is among you of all his people, may his God be with him. Let him go up to Jerusalem, which is in Judea, and build the house of Yahweh, the God of Israel. He is the God who is in Jerusalem. And let each one of who has survived, in whatever place he may live, be assisted by the men of his place with silver and with gold and with goods and with animals, besides the free offering for the house of God that is in Jerusalem. So this is right around 538 BC, okay, that Cyrus makes this proclamation. Cyrus became king in, I think it is 538, but I'll verify that. Hold on. Cyrus became king. He defeated Babylon. Bear with me. Yeah, in 538, and makes this proclamation right away, which was prophesied by Jeremiah. Jeremiah said this was going to happen. Okay, so he makes the proclamation. So what happens? And what you have to do if you want to really understand this specific period of time, you need to read Ezra, and then you need to jump into Haggai and Zechariah. And then after those three books, you want to read Nehemiah and Esther. So all of them are happening in this really tight period of time, and it's fabulous. So after he makes the proclamation, you can imagine the excitement that had to be going on in the children of Judah and Benjamin's lives and their hearts as they've been captive for 70 years in a foreign land. But only part of them return in the first wave. There's actually two waves of the children of Judah and Benjamin that return to Judah. The 10 northern tribes of Israel, they're in Assyria, but Judah and Benjamin was carried away into Babylon. And so only part of them immediately return. 43.
So what did you say?
I'm sorry?
Dennis, who did you
What's
say
that?
returns?
Say again.
Who did you say returns?
Only a
First.
part of Judah and Benjamin returned to Jerusalem. That's out of the kingdom of Judah. You remember, the kingdom was divided. You had the northern kingdom of Israel, the southern kingdom of Judah. Judah is made up of the tribes of Judah and Benjamin. Israel's made up of the other 10 tribes. We don't know what happened to Simeon. Simeon kind of gets amalgamated into maybe Judah and Benjamin, because that's where they were located, right down in fact, they were kind of in the middle of the area that Judah, the tribe of Judah, had. There was a spot that was Simeon, but you don't read anything about Simeon after the captivity. So not really sure what happened to them. I said 10 tribes up north because you have 2 half tribes of Manasseh. I believe that's right. And then you got Ephraim and the rest of them. But only part of the captives go back in this first wave. And you can read about that in Ezra. We're not going to go there. But about 50,000 people all totaled. There's 43 plus thousand, and it's enumerated. Ezra did a great job. I mean, he's got complete history of who goes back. about 43 plus thousand Judeans, or from the tribes of Judah and Benjamin, plus 7 plus thousand of their slaves and servants, and 200 singers. I don't know why I threw them in there, but there's 200 singers going back with them, quite a chorus. So they go back to Jerusalem. It would have taken them a few months to get ready, get everything together, off they go. And the first thing that they do when they get to Jerusalem is they rebuild the altar, which makes sense because they want to resume the sacrifices and worship to God, to Yahweh. So they rebuild the altar right away. And then the reconstruction of the foundation and the walls of Jerusalem. And you remember, Nebuchadnezzar had destroyed the temple. He burned it and destroyed it and busted the walls down and made a mess of things. So the reconstruction of the foundation and the walls begins in the second month of the second year after they return. So somewhere around 536 BC, they start working on the foundation and the walls. And that portion of the work takes about 7 years. They get the walls and the foundation all rebuilt. Then Cyrus dies, king of Persia dies, and a guy named Cambyses becomes the king. And of course, he's not fully aware of Cyrus's decree. And there's political pressure that takes place from the Sumerians. And these Sumerians are not true Sumerians. They're people that Assyria had brought in there to settle that land. Because let's say James is a great king, and Tim is a great king, and James invades Tim's land and captures it and defeats him in a war. So James going to take Tim's people, maybe not all of them, but a bunch of them, enough to weaken that country. He's going to take those people captive. He's going to take them to his land, his kingdom, and he's going to bring people from his kingdom into Tim's kingdom to resettle it. By doing that, he's got people that are friendly to him in this new captured kingdom that he can rely on and have communication with. Okay, so these people that are in the Sumerians, these are resettled Assyrians in that area and other people. So what happens is after Cambyses becomes king, there becomes political pressure, and you can read all about this in Ezra. But the Sumerians and the people that are trans-Euphrates, which is west of the Euphrates River, which would be Syria, today Syria and Jordan, and the western part of Iraq, they put pressure on, and they go and they tell Cambyses to stop this work. This is a rebellious city. These people will surely rebel against the king. And so Cambyses puts a stop to the work, and that work stops in 529 BC for a period of 10 years, a very long coffee break. But you can imagine what the Jews are feeling. They just came out of 70 years of captivity. They have the decree they can go rebuild Jerusalem, and they get started on it. They get the walls and the foundations done, and then there's the threat of going back under captivity. It would have taken the winds completely out of their sails. And that's basically what happened. And so there's this 10-year lull under fear of captivity. And I remember the whole captivity experience was really still raw in their thoughts. So eventually, through Cambyses dies, there's an upheaval in the Persian Empire. 2 years of upheaval takes place. They're vying for who's going to get power. And Darius, or Darius, however we pronounce that, Darius becomes king. And this Darius is the same guy who is the king of Babylon that Esther marries. And that's why Esther's involved in this later. Okay. Isn't this cool? This is some really good stuff. So This is Darius. He becomes king in 520 BC. And if you continue to read Ezra, you'll see. Now, the one thing you have to be careful about when you read about these people's names, that you'll read Xerxes, you'll read about Artaxerxes, you'll read about Ahasuerus, I think I'm pronouncing that right, and you'll read about Darius. All of these are titles, and they're titles from different languages. And so when you read about Xerxes, it can be, it's also Darius in scripturally, because the Xerxes that comes later, there's several Xerxes, there's several Artaxerxes, and there's several Dariuses or Dariuses in history. But the ones in the Bible, it's Xerxes, Artaxerxes, Ahasuerus, and Darius are all the same guy. Sometimes it may use Ahasuerus for Cyrus too. I can't remember off the top of my head. But the Xerxes, like if you've seen the movie The 300, raise your hand. Have you seen that movie? All right, great movie. And then there's 300 part 2. Well, the 300, that Xerxes is later on. He's the one that fights that comes and invades Greece, fights at the Battle of Thermopylae, and then the naval battle of Salamis, I think it was called. That is not the Xerxes that you read about in the Bible. So, am I boring you to death? I hope not. So eventually Darius becomes king in 520 BC. And, more political pressure is coming on Darius, but there are believers, there are Jews who remember the decree that Cyrus made, and they tell Darius about it. Darius says, go to the library and look for the record. And they bring him a scroll. Remember, it says Cyrus had it written in Ezra. And they bring Darius the scroll. Darius reads the scroll, reads what Cyrus had proclaimed, and said, absolutely not. You will let these people rebuild the temple. Not only are you going to let them rebuild the temple, but you're going to help them. You're going to send them wood. You're going to send them provisions. You're going to send them gold. You're going to send anything they want. You people that have been putting the political pressure on, you're going to help. So that's the load up to the book of Haggai. So please go to Haggai. I love this book. It's the second shortest book in the Bible, I believe. I think Obadiah is the shortest, and Haggai, I believe, is the second shortest, like 38 verses or something like that, 2 chapters. So remember when I said Darius becomes king in 520. Now, in Jerusalem right now, we have, Ezra's not there. Ezra's still in Babylon. Ezra comes later with another group of people. But in Jerusalem, we have a guy named Nehemiah and a guy named Mordecai. They're either the same Nehemiah and Mordecai in the book of Nehemiah and Esther, or they're just 2 guys with the same names. If they are the same Nehemiah and the same Mordecai, then at some point in time, they're in Jerusalem, and then they go back to Babylon, and then they come back to Jerusalem with the second group of exiles that come home. So not really sure. I don't know how to prove that. But you got a guy named Mordecai, you got a guy named Nehemiah, you got Zerubbabel, you got Joshua, the high priest, Zerubbabel, the governor, and you got Haggai. Yeah. And so they're all there along with almost 50,000 other people. They've built the altar, and they got the foundation and the walls done, and now they've been idle for 10 years. In chapter 1 of Haggai, 519 BC, Haggai starts to prophesy, and he only prophesies for 4 months. That's it. But he had to be a cool dude. Verse 1, in the second year of Darius the king, In the 6th month, on the 1st day of the month, the word of Yahweh came by Haggai the prophet to Zerubbabel. It's a great name. It means foreigner in Babylon. In Ezra, he's the man that's named Sheshbazzar. Okay, in Ezra he'll be called Sheshbazzar, but in Haggai he's called Zerubbabel. I believe Zerubbabel is his Hebrew name, and Sheshbazzar is his Babylonian name. It's very common for them to be given new names. So the word of the Lord comes to Haggai the prophet to Zerubbabel, the governor, the son of Shealtiel. He's the grandfather of Jehoiachin. Zerubbabel is. He's the grandson of the last Old Testament prophet or Old Testament legitimate king to sit on the throne of David in Jerusalem. Okay, no other king after Jehoiachin, no other king has sat on the throne of David physically. Because the guy that Nebuchadnezzar installs, who is Jehoiachin's brother, Zedekiah, he's not legitimately in the bloodline of the kings. He's not the legitimate king. Anyway, so son of Shealtiel, grandson of Jeconiah, governor of Judah, and to Joshua, the son of Jehozadak, the high priest, saying, this is what Yahweh of armies says. These people say the time hasn't yet come, the time for Yahweh's house to be built. Sure, that's what they were. They were afraid. They were afraid. You know, they didn't want to go back to work. They didn't want to go back as captives. They didn't want a war. They didn't want pressure. Just let me live my life. I just want to live my life here in Jerusalem. You know, maybe we'll get back to the temple, you know, when it's time. Verse 3, then the word of Yahweh came by Haggai the prophet, saying, is it time for you yourselves to dwell in your paneled, which paneled is finished. You know, they had roofs on it, wooden roofs. It was all finished, paneled houses, while this house lies waste? That's what God's saying. Is it time for you to live in your finished, beautiful home while my house lies waste? And I thought, what is Yahweh's house today? He said it in the manifestations. My habitation is now within you. Mm-hmm. Huh. Wow. 1 Corinthians 3:16 says that. Also 1 Corinthians 6:19. Do you not know that all of you together are God's sanctuary and that the Spirit of God lives within you or lives in you? You know, but you look at the church today, it lies waste.
Yep.
It lies waste. Can you in your mind remember any time in your life when you saw the church of God in glory? At least in partial glory. I can. And it's no longer there that way. You know, today, universalism is a big deal within the Christian church. Oh, you know, let's just embrace everybody. All religion, Baha'i faith, I don't care what you know, if you want to worship toads on a wooden altar, I don't care. This is just everybody are children of God. No. Yeah. How about the verse in Isaiah 5:20? That's a great verse. You don't have to go there. Woe to those who call evil good and good evil, who put darkness for light and light for darkness, who substitute bitter for sweet and sweet for bitter. Woe to them. I don't know what woe is. I just don't want it. I don't want any woe. I don't want to feel any woe. I don't want to see any woe. It just doesn't sound good. So, yeah, and the church lies waste. The the church of God, the new habitation, my habitation is now within you, he said. If you look at it, it's in pretty much a shamble. Verse 5, go back to Haggai. Now, therefore, this is what Yahweh of armies says. Consider your ways. He tells them, think about what you're doing. You've been on a 10-year coffee break. You know, lunchtime's over. You have sown much, and you bring in little. You eat, but you don't have enough. You drink, but you are not filled with drink. You clothe yourselves, but no one is warm. And he that earns wages to put them into a bag with holes in it. Your money just goes as fast as you can make it. This is what Yahweh of armies says. Consider your ways. Think about your life. Think about what you're doing. Judah, go up to the mountain, bring wood and build the house. This wood would be used, the walls and the foundations, that's all stone. But the wood would be, the inside of all the walls of the temple were lined with wood, floor to ceiling. The ceiling would have been wood. All of the wood beams that held up, the roof, and of course the door jambs, the trim, the doors themselves, all of that would have been made out of wood. He's telling them, let's finish the house. Let's finish the house. Go get wood and build the house. I will take pleasure in it, and I will be glorified, says Yahweh. What's the church's job? To glorify God. That's the church's job. To glorify God. Build the house, finish the house, and I will take pleasure in it, and I will be glorified, says Yahweh. You looked for much, and behold, it came to little. And when you brought it home, I blew it away. Why, says Yahweh of armies? Because of my house that lies waste, while each of you is busy with his own house. Therefore, for your sake, the heavens withhold the dew, the earth withholds its fruit. And I called for a drought on the land, and on the mountains, and on the grain, and on the new wine, and on the oil, and on whatever the ground brings forth, and on people, and on the livestock, and on all the labor of your hands. Oh my! Sometime read Deuteronomy chapter 28, and look at the cursings that would befall Israel if they forsook the covenant that they had made with God. It falls right in line with exactly what we just read. And what does Deuteronomy 6:4 say? It's the beginning, the Shema. Hear, O Israel, the Lord our God is one, and you will love the Lord your God with all your heart, soul, mind, and strength. They had not been doing that. 10-year sabbatical. They weren't actively loving God in their lives. Oh, they might have mentally assented to it, but they weren't actively doing it, because what had God told them to do? Build my house. It was prophesied that Cyrus was going to do this. Jeremiah prophesied about it. This was God's desire. Verse 12. There's great correction and reproof in Haggai, but there's great tenderness and compassion and encouragement here too. Tremendous encouragement. And that's what God said in the manifestation, it was in a prayer, that we can build, that's so thankful that we can build each other up. That's encouragement. Watch this. Then Zerubbabel, the son of Shealtiel, and Joshua, the son of Jehozadak, the high priest, with all the remnant of the people, obeyed the voice of Yahweh their God and the words of Haggai the prophet. And Yahweh their God had, as Yahweh their God had sent him, and the people feared Yahweh. Then Haggai, Yahweh's messenger, spoke Yahweh's message to the people, saying, I am with you. I am with you. That's going to come up really big later. You hold on to those words. I am with you, says Yahweh. Yahweh stirred up the spirit of Zerubbabel, the son of Shealtiel, governor of Judah, and the spirit of Joshua, the son of Jehozadak, the high priest, and the spirit of all the remnant of the people. And they came and worked on the house of Yahweh of armies, their God. In the 24th day of the month, in the 6th month, in the 2nd year of Darius the king, at 23 days after Haggai begins to prophesy, they come back to work. And that makes sense because it would take time. You got 50,000 people that you got to stir up, and they're not all in Jerusalem. They're in five or six different small towns like Bethlehem and other towns that surround Jerusalem and in Jerusalem. So you got to get them all stirred up. You got to get this word moving. And finally, 23 days after Haggai begins to prophesy, they finally get back to work. They come back to work. Now, chapter 2 of Haggai. This is so much fun. In the 7th month, on the 21st day of the month, nearly 1 month into the work now, 1 month back into the work, they're finishing the house, finishing the temple. They've been at it for almost a month. The word of Yahweh came to Haggai again, the prophet, saying, "Speak now to Zerubbabel, the son of Shealtiel, governor of Judah, and to Joshua, the son of Jehozadak, the high priest, and to the remnant of the people, saying, who is left among you who saw this house in its former glory? How do you see it now? Is it not in your eyes as nothing?" Wow. But one of the things we know from that statement, some of these people were pretty old. They were hitting 80 years old. And that was old for that period of time, because some of them had seen the former temple before it was destroyed. Who is left among you? Some of them were left, making them somewhere 80 plus or minus years old. And I remember seeing the church in a glorious time. I would like to see the church in that glorious time again. Verse 4. Here we go. Yet now be strong, Zerubbabel. There's the encouragement, says Yahweh. Be strong, Joshua, son of Jehozadak, the high priest. Be strong, all you people of the land, says Yahweh, and work, finish the house. For I am with you, says Yahweh of armies. This is the word that I covenanted with you. Wow, what a big statement. This is covenant language. This is the word that I covenanted with you when you came out of Egypt, and my spirit remains among you. Do not be afraid. Hold your finger here. Look at Exodus 23 real quick. Here's that covenant language. Exodus 23, starting in verse 26. And this is repeated other places. I know in Deuteronomy, but behold, I'm going to send an angel before you to guard you on the road and to bring you into the place that I have prepared. Pay attention to him and listen to his voice. Do not be rebellious against him, for he will not pardon your disobedience, for my name is in him. But if you carefully listen to his voice and do all that I say, then I will be an enemy to your enemies and an adversary to your adversaries. For my angel will go before you and bring you to the land of the Amorite, the Hittite, the Perizzite, the Canaanite, the Hivite, and the Jebusite, and I will cut them off. You must not bow down to their gods, nor serve them, nor follow their practices, but you must utterly overthrow them and demolish their sacred standing stones. You are to serve Yahweh your God, and he will bless your bread and your water, and I will take sickness away from your midst. No one will miscarry or be barren in the land, and I will fulfill the numbers of your days. Doesn't this speak to what was happening with Judah and Benjamin at the time? They'd sown much, brought in little. Their cattle, their livestock had not reproduced. Their people were not even reproducing. Verse 27, I will send my terror before you and will confuse all the people that you come to, and I will make all your enemies turn their backs to you, fleeing from them. I will send the hornet before you and will drive out the Hittite and the Canaanite and the Hivite and the Canaanite and the Hittite from before you. I will not drive them out from before you in 1 year, lest the land become desolate and the animals of the field multiply against you. And it goes on. But God had promised them in the covenant that he would care for them. He would watch over them, that they were to do his work, that they were to make him first in their lives. And they had kind of forgotten that for 10 years. And so all this calamity was happening. Back to Haggai, verse 6. But that's what he says there in verse 5. This is the word that I covenanted with you when you came out of Egypt, and my spirit remains among you. Do not be afraid. Verse 6, for this is what Yahweh of armies says, yet once more, in a little while, I will shake the heavens and the earth and the sea and the dry land. I will shake all nations. That's tribulation. That's what he's talking about. The period of tribulation, the period of Jacob's trouble. The desired of all nations will come. The King of kings and Lord of lords. The king that they always wanted. Our Messiah, our Lord. The desired of all nations will come. And he will set up his millennial kingdom. And I will fill this house with glory, says Yahweh of armies. Not that particular house that they were building, but what that house represents in the millennial kingdom. He will fill that house with glory. The silver is mine and the gold is mine, says Yahweh of armies. The latter glory of this house will be greater than the former, and the glory of the church one day will be greater than all of the glory that the church has ever manifested to this day. The latter glory of this house will be greater than the former, says Yahweh of armies, and in this place will I give prosperity, says Yahweh of armies. Then, in the 24th day of the 9th month, God throws that in, kind of like, and then, scene 2, in the 24th day of the 9th month, which is now 2 months later still than what Haggai had just prophesied. In the 2nd year of Darius, the word of Yahweh came by Haggai, the prophet, saying, this is what Yahweh of armies says. Ask now the priest concerning the law, saying, if anybody carries holy meat in the fold of his garment, and with his fold touches bread, stew, wine, oil, or any other food, will it become holy? The priest said, no. We know that. No. No. That other stuff doesn't become holy just because you touch it. Then Haggai said, if one who is unclean by reason of a dead body touches any of these, any of the wine, food, stew, meat, will it be unclean? The priest said, yeah, it'll be unclean. Yeah, sure. If you touched a dead body, you were unclean. And if you touched anything, it was unclean. Then Haggai said, then Haggai answered, so is this people. And so is this nation before me, says Yahweh. And so is every work of their hands. What they offer there is unclean. And the reason being, you can read this in Ezra chapter 9, verses 1 through 10:44. They had married pagan wives, some of them from Babylon, some of them from the Sumerians, the Hittites, the Hivites, and all the other Perizzites, and they had intermarried. And God specifically tells Israel many, many times in the Old Testament, do not marry the children, the daughters of these 7 nations, the pagan nations. Don't marry them because they'll lead your sons astray. They'll lead you to other gods, just like they did to Solomon. And that's exactly what happened. And you can read that in Ezra. I don't want to belabor all that, but their marriage, what he's saying is, your marriage to pagan wives do not make the pagan wives clean. But your marriage to the pagan wives do make you unclean. And if you read on in Ezra, Ezra, when he finds out that they still are married to these pagan, he rents his clothes, pulls hair out of his head, and he laments, and he tells them they have to get rid of them. And that had to be a very difficult time in the lives of these people. They had families, they had pagan wives, they had children by these pagan wives, but they had to separate themselves from them. So, and it brings up a great point about we have to be careful regarding the associations that we have in life, what we associate ourselves with, not just people, but things, music. What are we occupying our time with? What do we occupy our thoughts with? It has an effect on our lives, a deep effect many times. So we need to take care regarding those things that we associate with. Basically, these truths from Haggai. In fact, 1 Corinthians 15:53. Do not be deceived. Bad company corrupts good morals. That's what the REV says. In the commentary, John Shainheit writes, bad company. In biblical times, bad company referred to being with worthless or evil people. Today, the company we keep can also include the television, movies we watch, video games we play, etc. Magazines that we might read, fill in the blank, as well as the worthless, ungodly, or evil people we spend time with. We must make no mistake. Who or what we spend our time with will greatly influence how we think and act. And you would think that maybe some of those pagan wives had some effect on the thinking of the children of Judah and Benjamin during that 10-year period of coffee break. I would think so. This is why the wise Christian is careful to spend time praying, reading the Bible, and in fellowship with other serious Christians. There are many other verses in the Bible that have the same general message. And he goes on to talk about the Greek phrase, bad company corrupts good morals, came from a play written by a guy named Menander. I think I pronounced that right. In somewhere like 300, around 300 BC. But by the time Paul was around, it had become kind of a colloquialism, an everyday saying, an idiom that everybody would have known and been raised with. Bad company corrupts good morals. But that's what God's telling these children of Judah and Benjamin. He's trying to get them back on track. Yes, you're working. Yes, you're back to work. But guess what? We need to make improvements in your lives. We need to root out the stuff that you should not be associating yourself with. Verse 15. Now, please, God says, please consider from this day and backwards, before a stone was laid on a stone in Yahweh's temple. Through all that time, when one came to a heap of 20 measures, there were only 10. When one came to the wine vat to draw out 50, there were only 20. I struck you with blight and mildew and hail and all the work of your hands. Yet you didn't turn to me, says Yahweh. Consider, please, from this day and backwards, from the 24th day of the 9th month, since the day that the foundation of Yahweh's temple was laid, consider it. Think about those 10 years and what happened. Is the seed yet in the barn? The answer to that question is no. Because that seed that it's talking about there is not the seed for planting. It's the seed of harvest, the grain, food. Is there food yet in the barn? No. then it says yes. The yes is not an answer to the rhetorical question. The yes goes with what's after the word yes. Is there seed yet left in the barn? That is a rhetorical question. They knew there wasn't. It was about empty. Yes, the vine, the fig tree, the pomegranate, and the olive tree have not brought forth its harvest. The blight and the mildew had destroyed the harvest. From now, God says, but from this day will I bless you. From this day I will bless you. And I told you, Zechariah, here's Haggai prophesying. Zechariah starts prophesying 2 months after Haggai started. So they're getting a double whammy. They're getting like a double punch here from Haggai and from Zechariah. So Haggai starts prophesying. Zechariah starts prophesying 2 months later. And in Zechariah chapter 8, we're almost done here, but Zechariah chapter 8, verses 9 through 13, say almost the same thing Haggai just said. But Zechariah is gorgeous. You should read it. It's about the tribulation period and about the millennial kingdom. It's all about Israel's hope. This is what Yahweh of armies says in verse 9 of Zechariah 8. Let your hands be strong. Yeah, that's what he said. Be strong, O Zerubbabel. Let your hands be strong. You who hear in these days the words from the mouth of the prophets who were in the day that the foundation of the house of Yahweh of armies was laid, even the temple, that it might be built. For behold, before those days, there was no wages for man, nor any wages for an animal. Neither was there any peace to him who went out or came in because of the enemy. For I set all men, every one against his neighbor. But now I will not be to the remnant of this people as in the former days, says Yahweh of armies, for there will be a sowing of peace, and the vine will yield its fruit, and the ground will give its increase, and the heavens will give their due, and I will cause the remnant of this people to inherit all these things. It will come to pass that as you, house of Judah and house of Israel, were a curse among the nations, so will I save you, and you will be a blessing. Do not be afraid. Let your hands be strong. Isn't that a powerful encouragement? That's cool. Back to Haggai, chapter 2, we're in verse 20. The word of Yahweh came the second time to Haggai in the 24th day of the month, saying, speak to Zerubbabel, the governor of Judah, saying, I will shake the heavens and the earth. I will overthrow the throne of kingdoms. I will destroy the strength of the kingdoms of the nations. I will overthrow the chariots and those who ride in them. The horses and their riders will come down, everyone by the sword of his brother. In that day, says Yahweh of armies, I will take you, Zerubbabel. What is that day that Haggai's prophesying about, that Yahweh is talking about? In that day is the time of the end of tribulation, the battle of Armageddon. Tribulation's over, and the Lord is going to set up his millennial kingdom. That's what it's talking about here. In that day, I will take you, Zerubbabel, my servant, the son of Shealtiel, says Yahweh, and make you as a signet. Wow. Second in command to the king. The man that wore the signet ring of the king was second in command. He had all the authority of the king in the kingdom. I will make you as a signet, for I have chosen you, Zerubbabel, says Yahweh of armies. Zerubbabel is a type of Christ. He's rebuilding the temple. That's exactly what Jesus is going to do. Not only that, but if you read the bloodline of Christ, the Davidic, the Davidic line in Matthew, you will see the names of Jehoiachin, Shealtiel, and Zerubbabel in that Davidic line. Huh. So what God is telling Zerubbabel, the king is going to come through you, through your line. What encouragement. And he is a type of the Messiah, of the Christ, of the King. Beautiful stuff. Ends with, says Yahweh of armies. There's so much more in here, but I love that book. And by the way, there is a Shealtiel and a Zerubbabel also in the bloodline or the lineage in Luke, but they are different people, and they're not in the same generation time-wise, and they have a different, that Shealtiel has a different father. It's not Jehoiachin, but that gets really difficult to ferret all that out. What we do know is because of what it says in Haggai, him being the signet, that all indicates towards the king lineage, towards the line, the bloodline of David. And so that's a little bit on Haggai. And I just love that book.